let's see if somebody who's not involved understands what
Okay,
you're
we can
saying.
explain.
As I understand it, the budget is set and approved, that spending authority is Bill's committees, trustees make sure that it's being done in that authority. If it is not, they deny the bill. Is that something
We have line items, yeah, and your line items are, no budget is ever final. I answer that question all the time. People think that once it's voted on and approved that the budget's final. A budget can be amended, it happens all the time. Now, the process to amend it, but the line items that are established are established for a reason. It's as a guide. Sometimes needs change. We've seen tornadoes, we've seen community needs, we've seen flooding, and you can't always predict. And that's when you may have to go back. But a supervisor spending authority is under the guidelines of that budget, that drafted and approved guideline. And they are not permitted by state law, I think, and practice to go outside of that without necessary.
So if a line item is short, they can bring a line item transfer to the board if it meets those parameters, and if it's not more than 10% of the entire fund, they can just approve that line item transfer to move it around so that you're not opening up your budget every, time to pay bills. But if you decide, that you have a huge, if all of a sudden you have a major expense that you never budgeted for, you have to amend that budget. You just have to do the notice, follow the public hearing procedure, and amend that budget to create the additional item. But that appropriation amount that's your lawful authority to spend that money. And if you don't have that lawful authority, that appropriation money, to spend that money, you can't spend it.
I always say you have to remember, it's public dollars. They're not township dollars. And you are telling the public how you're anticipating to spend that money over the next 12 months. And it's an anticipation, but sometimes the need will change. And I've taught government for 18 years. There's 3 cycles of budgeting: where you were, where you are, and where you think you're going to go. And those are all based on projections. But there's provisions built into the system, like Kurt just said, that 10% transfer rule. 10% can be done with just simple board approval. Over 10% requires you to amend the budget because you are going back at the drawing table and you are moving money around to accommodate. If it's more than 10%, it's a significant purchase.
What happens if there are prepaid bills that have not been voted on by the trustees? So action has been taken outside the budget without trustee vote. Sounds like.
We always recommend that if there's going to be any need to prepay bills, that the township have an expenditure policy in place. I think Jerry touched on this a little bit earlier, where you allow the supervisor to spend up to a certain amount. So you want to have that policy set by the township board, saying you can spend prepay or pre-spend up to a certain amount, and it'll be the supervisor can spend up to $5,000. As long as it's budgeted, it's in that line item, you can spend up to that certain amount. But if it's already happened, again, that's if it's an expenditure that was budgeted for and it's a proper township expenditure, I think it would be hard for a township board to justify not approving it. That would be my initial thought. I don't know if they could refuse to approve the expense. Oh, sorry.
Our best practice interpretation of that scenario is that no expenditure should occur without board approval. And if expenditures have been made, bills have been paid without board approval, it could be argued that they were null and void. But that's a very gray area. But the supervisor, by state law and best practice, is not permitted to pay bills without the necessary approval of the trustees. But it would take someone wanting to challenge that, to go to that next level.
That's
Because
never-
it's a very rough slope, because if it's like utility bills, I have townships that will call, and you could work out agreements with your utility companies to maybe prepay 2 months in advance so that you're always kind of a month behind on the bill, but you're prepaid, a monthly fee. You can work that out. If they're regular static bills, we'll call them, like a phone bill, but if it's some type of contractual agreement, that's another area.
What do you mean answer.
The question, yeah, we
The
can't.
mic, you gotta turn your head and talk to the mic.
I'm sorry. The question is, what do you mean that it is, quote, up to the supervisor to implement policies? Is it not required that the policies be approved by the board of trustees?
So the actual policies are set by the board, and the implementation on the day-to-day workings of the township, that's overseen by the supervisor. So it's, the board sets the rules and the supervisor implements them. So if the board will adopt, like, say, a personnel manual that will say, these are how many vacation days you get, these are how many sick days you get, and things of that nature. The supervisor, if especially, if it's, unless there's some other designation already made by the board, the supervisor is the one that's going to implement that personnel policy, make sure that, ultimately that the employees are making sure that they only take that certain amount of vacation days. So that's maybe an example of how the policy is set by the board.
I would want to know specifics, because I think you may agree with me that if it's a personnel policy versus another type of, I would want to know what the policy question was.
Thank you. The town board can delegate some authority to the supervisor. Can this be implied, or does it always require a vote?
I would say if there's going to be any delegation of the board's authority, it should always be done by a vote. You don't want to have questions about what authority somebody has, especially if it's going to be spending money or taking other actions. I think it should always be done by a clear vote. That's my vote.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I look at the board and I try to educate the board that your supervisor is kind of like your executive branch and the trustees are your legislative branch. You want the board to approve any policy procedure that's in front of it. But you have a CEO, like an executive member, like a governor, to administer what that legislative branch has given them the authority to do. And we kind of preach this from the TOI answering questions. Your board minutes and your board policies and procedures are what you have in place to govern what you do. And it should be a unified approach. But we have townships across the state that have different personnel manuals for the assessor's office, the highway department, in the real world where, township officials don't get along sometimes. Can you believe that? The unique is that we would want one policy for everybody. But your board approval is your stamp, and you want that.
And frankly, for a lot of times, it's better for everybody, and it protects the township as a whole to have that clear delegation.
And have all that outlined in your minutes, because your minutes are proof that the board's approved it.
Okay, thank you. If a trustee, supervisor, or other elected official is suspected of having committed an illegal or unethical act, what remedy is there short of removing that person in the next election? Is there any process for removal from office?
So if there was any illegal acts, they talk to the state's attorney or the police. That's certainly the first option, always. That's what the voters just say.
Okay. Can you explain what conflict of interest is for board members or supervisors?
We could talk for another 2 days about conflicts of interest and what they are. Generally, the township supervisor and the township trustees can't not have any financial interest in any action that they're called upon to vote. So if it's
For some weird reason, I think the statute says 7%.
there's an exceptions, yeah. There's a host of exceptions.
I don't know how they came up with 7%.
A publicly traded company, and you own less than 7% of it, and you tell everybody that, and you abstain from voting on this. There's exceptions there. But generally, you can't vote on anything that you have a financial interest in. That's where you get the conflict of interest coming in. So there's you can't be interested in any work or contract coming before the board. So supervisor, if say, for example, supervisor had a separate LLC that did maintenance work, and the supervisor hired his LLC to go do the maintenance work on township property and pay for it with township funds, that's a clear conflict of interest. You can't do that. But there's a host of other situations that come up. So
There's specific ones, but there's
I know that-
a lot of different.
I reference an index in my office that, the Attorney General's Office Opinions Division, I actually worked there early in my career, they put out, the Attorney General will issue opinions on conflicts of interest. It's a long backlog. But they will call us and ask us about compatibility of offices, and there's some other conflicts that are in those interpretations. They're accessible online if anybody wanted to look at them. But through the state's attorney's office, I think that's where that would all filter down.
So there's specific categories of offices that the same person can't hold, so that the Attorney General's addressed on.
Okay, thank you. It is my understanding that our township food pantry is a separate entity from the township. Is there a conflict of interest if the food pantry board is made up solely of the supervisor and trustees?
So it's a separate, not-for-profit corporation.
Non-elected, appointed by the township.
Yep.
Appointed by it's just, the directors of the NFP are made up of the township.
Wait a minute. That information.
The food pantry is not appointed by the township. It is a separate 501c3.
Yeah.
It just happens to be located in the township.
How are the board members put on the board?
The organization that runs the food pantry appoints their own board. It has nothing to do with the
No
township.
bearing.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
That's a separate legal entity, yeah.
Do townships have the authority to rent housing to people who are not seniors?
We need more.
That's an interesting.
Are townships able to rent property?
Rent property.
Like a community building?
No.
You can provide
A
assistance.
place to live.
You can provide like rent assistance through GA.
Like,
rent
yeah, like
assistance.
Rental property. It's a residential rental property.
Who owns the property?
The township, sort of.
That's a unique one.
I would want to know, yeah, is it a home, a apartment building?
House. It's gonna be just a house, is what they said.
I think there had to be more information about how and why the property was acquired. I mean, the township can't, like, the electors can make conveyances for, the use
People
of
will-
the property, but
You're making me think of another scenario. People will call and ask about a township expense, and I always use this as an example. When you levy for money in a township or a road district, they are for purposes that benefit everyone in that township equally. People will call me and they'll say, can a township make a donation for a tornado siren? Everyone in that township would equally benefit from the safety that that tornado siren will provide. Someone will call and say, can a township donate to a Christmas party for senior citizens? That's a very slippery slope because that Christmas party is only for seniors. It's not for everybody equally in the township. Now, if a township has a grant system established, a line item in their budget for these types of things, and they let people fill out an application, and they get, that's a little bit different, but you have to remember that it's public money, and everybody in the township needs to benefit equally from the services that are being provided.
it has to be public purpose.
A public purpose.
Yes, public purpose.
Okay, good news, we're down to just a few more questions. Can a board do something designated as an elected responsibility without a vote by the electors? So, can the board, the township board, take action on something that should be determined at a town meeting, an elected responsibility without a vote of the electors?
No, again, that's the different silos that we have here. The electors have their rights, the township board has their rights, supervisor, assessor, or highway commissioner has their rights, but the township board can't decide that we're going to decide we're going to buy property on our own, we're going to usurp that authority from the electors. They can't, there's no mechanism that I'm aware of in the township code that would allow them to take that power away from the electors.
Anything, Ted? That's it, okay. I think we might have covered this, but you guys are better at this than I am, so I'm gonna say that this is the last question. What is the supervisor's role when the trustees vote to exclude a bill for payment?
Say again, please?
What is the supervisor's role when the trustees vote to exclude a bill from payment?
I think it would be
my initial reaction is provide documentation to the township board to explain why it was a proper expense in that line item and was meeting that budgeted amount.
I would wanna know what type of bill it was.
Okay, thank you. So, it looks as though we have answered all the questions that have been turned in. That have been turned in.
I know.
Not that may be still on your mind. So it's time to offer some very sincere thank yous. First of all, I would like to thank both